Imagine being told that you are stepping aboard the safest ship ever built. The largest moving object humanity had ever created. A floating palace designed by the greatest engineers of the age. A ship so advanced that many believed nothing could sink it. Now imagine that just 4 days later, you are standing on its freezing deck in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean as it slowly disappears beneath your feet. This is not fiction. This really happened. And more than 100 years later, the sinking of the Titanic remains one of the most fascinating disasters in human history. But the real story is even more incredible than the movie. It is a story of ambition, wealth, engineering genius, ignored warnings, extraordinary courage, and tragic mistakes. Tonight, we're going back to April 1912 to discover what really happened aboard the Titanic. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Atlantic Ocean was the highway connecting Europe and America. Millions of immigrants crossed it. Businessmen crossed it. The wealthy crossed it. Owning the greatest ocean liner meant prestige, money, and global influence. Two companies dominated the competition: Cunard Line and White Star Line. In 1907, Cunard shocked the world by launching two revolutionary ships, Lusitania and Mauretania. They were fast. Very fast. White Star Line knew it couldn't win a speed contest. Instead, it chose another strategy. Build ships so large and luxurious that nobody would care if they were slightly slower. The result would become three sister ships: Olympic, Titanic, Britannic. Among them, Titanic would become the most famous. Construction began in Belfast, Ireland. More than 15,000 workers participated in the project. The shipyard itself had to be expanded because no existing facility was large enough. Titanic was a monster. 882 feet long, 92 feet wide, 46,000 tons. Her anchor alone weighed more than 15 tons. The ship contained electric elevators, a swimming pool, Turkish baths, gymnasium, libraries, luxury restaurants, squash court. For first-class passengers, life aboard Titanic felt like staying in a 5-star hotel. Some suites cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars in today's money. The ship represented the peak of the Edwardian era. An age of confidence. An age when people believed technology could solve almost any problem. Nobody knew that this confidence would soon be shattered. Titanic carried approximately 2,224 people. They came from every level of society. The rich and powerful occupied first class. Among them was John Jacob Astor, one of the richest men in the world. Astor's fortune today would be worth billions of dollars. Also on board was Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to one of America's most powerful business families. But Titanic was not just a ship for millionaires. Hundreds of third-class passengers traveled below deck. Many were immigrants heading to America in search of opportunity. Some came from Ireland, others from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Eastern Europe. Many sold everything they owned to buy a ticket. For them, Titanic represented hope, a new life, a new future. They had no idea they would become part of history. Captain Edward Smith was one of the most respected captains in the world. At 62 years old, he had spent decades at sea. Many passengers specifically chose voyages commanded by Smith because they trusted him. This journey was expected to be his final voyage before retirement. Nobody imagined it would become his last voyage forever. During the voyage, Titanic received multiple radio messages from nearby ships. The messages all carried the same warning: ice. Large ice fields had drifted unusually far south that year. Several ships reported dangerous conditions. One captain described giant icebergs directly along Titanic's route. But there was a problem. The ship's radio operators were overwhelmed sending passenger messages. Some warnings never reached the bridge. Others were acknowledged but not treated as urgent. This remains one of the most controversial aspects of the disaster. Could the sinking have been prevented if these warnings had been taken more seriously? Many historians believe the answer is yes. The weather was strange. The ocean was unusually calm. There were no waves, no moonlight. Visibility seemed good, but in reality conditions were dangerous. Normally waves break against the base of icebergs, making them easier to see. Tonight the sea looked like glass. The iceberg would appear only as a dark shape against a dark horizon. At 11:40 p.m., Lookout Frederick Fleet saw exactly that. A shadow. A giant black mass. Directly ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times. Then made the call. "Iceberg right ahead." On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch reacted immediately. Hard to starboard. Engines reversed. The giant ship began turning. But Titanic was simply too large. 37 seconds later, the iceberg scraped along the ship's side. Passengers felt almost nothing. One survivor later compared it to driving over a small bump in the road. But below the waterline, steel plates bent inward. Water began pouring into the ship. Titanic's fate had been sealed. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's chief designer, inspected the damage personally. He understood the ship better than anyone alive. Within minutes, he reached a terrifying conclusion. Titanic would sink. The damage extended across 6 watertight compartments. The ship could survive 4 flooded compartments. Not 6. Not even close. According to witnesses, Andrews quietly informed Captain Smith. The ship had perhaps 2 hours left. Imagine being the captain. More than 2,200 lives depend on your decisions. And you know the ship is already dead. The clock is ticking. And there is no rescue in sight. Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats. Enough for about 1,178 people. Less than half of everyone aboard. This sounds unbelievable today. Yet it was completely legal. Maritime regulations had not kept pace with modern ship sizes. The rules were outdated. Shipbuilders believed lifeboats would ferry passengers to rescue ships, not hold everyone at once. It was a fatal assumption. When evacuation began, many passengers refused to board. The ship looked perfectly safe. Why climb into a tiny boat hanging over freezing water? As a result, several early lifeboats left half empty. Seats that later could have saved dozens of lives. As panic spread, acts of extraordinary bravery emerged. The ship's musicians continued playing. None survived. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell and his team remained below deck. They kept the lights on and power running. This gave hundreds of passengers precious extra time. Not one of the engineers survived. Millionaire Benjamin Guggenheim reportedly changed into formal evening clothes and said, "We are dressed in our best and prepared to go down like gentlemen." He never left the ship. Meanwhile, John Jacob Astor helped his pregnant wife board a lifeboat. He asked if he could accompany her. The request was denied. He died that night. Around 2:18 a.m., the impossible happened. The enormous ship broke in half. For decades, many people doubted survivor accounts describing this event. Then, in 1985, the wreck was discovered. It confirmed they had been telling the truth all along. The bow disappeared first. Then the stern briefly rose high into the air. Moments later, it vanished beneath the Atlantic. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic was gone. More than 1,500 people entered water colder than ice. Most would not survive longer than 15 minutes. The screams lasted for only a short time. Then silence. A silence many survivors said they never forgot. At 4 a.m., the rescue ship Carpathia arrived. Only around 705 people survived. More than 1,500 were dead. The world was stunned. Newspapers called it the greatest maritime disaster in history. Investigations began immediately. The findings transformed maritime safety forever. Lifeboats became mandatory for all passengers. Continuous radio monitoring became standard. Ice patrols were established in the North Atlantic. The lessons learned from Titanic still protect ships today. For more than 70 years, Titanic remained lost. Many believed it would never be found. Then, in 1985, explorer Robert Ballard located the wreck nearly 12,500 feet below the ocean surface. The discovery shocked the world. The ship had split in two exactly as survivors claimed. Personal belongings still rested on the seabed. Shoes, suitcases, dishes. Reminders that this was not simply a shipwreck. It was a human tragedy. More than a century later, Titanic continues to fascinate us because it represents something universal. The limits of technology, the danger of overconfidence, and the extraordinary courage ordinary people can show when faced with the impossible. The ship was meant to be remembered as humanity's greatest achievement. Instead, it became history's most famous warning.